Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking. You're probably tired of me saying that by now, but in this awesome video we're going to add our app icon, we're going to add a launch screen, and then we're going to create a custom launch loading animation so that when we open the app, before we even get into the app, we have some custom launch animation that's going to add a great user experience. This loading animation is something that was actually requested a couple of times in my last course where we made a SwiftUI to-do list. And that's because in the last course, as well as this one, when you have small applications, the launch screen loads and then goes away very quickly, sometimes like with under a second, and sometimes it's hard to even see what the launch screen looks like. So what we're going to do is basically add our launch screen, but right behind the launch screen, we're going to create another screen that looks the exact same so that the user can't tell when the launch screen disappears and our next screen actually appears, because we're going to have the same starting UI. So this way we can then take our launch screen, add a little bit of animation on it, and then dismiss it when we want to on our own time to give our users a slightly better user experience.
All right, welcome back everyone. Back in our Xcode project, and as I mentioned in the last video, we have most of our app done, but we do not have the app icon or the launch screen complete. So in this video, we're going to start by just creating the simple app icon, which is the icon on the home screen. We do that by going to the assets.xc assets folder. I've done this in previous courses as well. We have the app icon item here, and then we can add all the pixel sizes for our app icon. And if you downloaded the resources at the beginning of this course, I already provided you all of the sizes that we need. You're more than welcome to use your own icon as well. And I also included an actual folder where you can just drag and drop the app icon. But I'm just going to walk through this manually and just drag and drop each size to its destination. So I'm going to read this as basically, instead of looking at this 40 times 40, I'm going to look at the points down here. So 20 point times 2, and that's what I'm going to look at for the app sizes here. So the icon of 20 times 2, and I'm going to click and drag that. Let's do 20 times 3. 29 times 2, 29 times 3, 40 times 2, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm just going to keep going and probably mute myself here. If you do drag and drop the wrong size, like I do right here, it will tell you with this triangle, so you know if you are doing this right or not. And finally, 1024, which is actually called iOS marketing. Let's just drag and drop that here. Let's build and run our app to the simulator and see if our app icon builds. All right, I'm going to minimize it, and it's looking a little bit better already. We have our crypto tracker. I'm going to actually close the app, and when we launch it, we have this black screen and then it loads. It happens really quickly, but we have a black screen and then it loads. And that black screen is the launch screen, which basically is no screen right now. So before we actually see the first screen in our app, I want to create basically a launch screen and a loading view that will give us a nice custom experience for when our app is opening. So on our project navigator here, I'm going to fold up some of these folders because we're not using them at the moment. Let's even close up the home folder and the detail folder. I love how organized we stayed throughout this whole course. And let's start by creating just a custom launch screen. So as I mentioned, if you follow my SwiftUI to-do list playlist, it is possible to create your launch screen in the info.p list. This is kind of what Apple's been pushing for SwiftUI apps, to create your launch screen right in here, and you can click the plus sign and you can add your image as well as a background color, and it should work. However, it is still buggy. It's been, almost 2 years now since SwiftUI launched, and I noticed I started building with this, and it does bug out sometimes when we change the device sizes. So I do not like to use this. I would like to use this in the future if Apple could clean up kind of some of the bugs that are related to this launch screen. But because of that, we're just going to play it safe and create a storyboard launch screen just like we did in the last app. So I'm going to actually click the minus sign on this launch screen here to remove it from my info.p list. And let's create a launch screen in an actual file. So I'm going to create a new folder in our core section here. Let's right click, create a new group, and we'll call this launch. I'm going to put it maybe right below the components. Inside the launch, let's create a new group called views. And inside the views, let's right click, create a new file. And this is going to be a launch screen, which is actually its own file type. So launch screen, click next, and let's call it launch screen. I'm just going to remove the space in here just to play it safe. So we'll do launch screen in camel case and click create. And again, we wrote our app in SwiftUI, so we did not use any storyboards like this. But we're going to create one very simple launch screen storyboard that I'll just walk you guys through right now. So we're going to delete this label. Let's first click on the view. Let's open up the background here. And unlike the rest of our app where we have a theme that changes from light mode to dark mode, I want to keep our launch screen always the same colors in light and dark mode. I think it would just be like a better, branding for our app. So when I look at the assets.exe assets folder, we have theme colors, but I'm going to create a new folder in this file. I'm going to right click, create a folder, and I'm going to rename it as launch colors. And in here, I'm going to right click, create a new color set. I'm going to call this launch background color. And I'm going to make it the black that we have in our dark mode. So I'm just going to copy that color, go to our launch background color and paste it. I think it's just pitch black actually. And I want it to be the same color for light and dark mode. So I could just paste it here so it's the same for both appearances. Or I could actually just change the appearances to none on the right side. And now it's a universal color in light and dark mode. I'm going to right click, create one more color set, and this will be called launch accent color. And I'm going to go to our accent color and just take the pink. I'm going to copy the pink and paste it here. And again, you can copy that from right here if you want the exact hues. And I'm going to make it appearances of none, so it is this pink in both light and dark mode. And now I'm going to reference these colors as we create our launch screen. So jumping back to the launch screen.storyboard, I'm going to click on the background and I'm going to click on the color. I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to set it as the launch background color that we just set up, which is pitch black, but just in case we want to customize our color theme, we now have access to the background, which will change automatically. And I want to put an image in the center of the screen, but I actually want to put it in the center of the safe area of the screen. So a quick little hack I found is first we're going to add a view, just a regular view to our app. So just look for a plain view. And I'm going to extend the view most of the way around the screen, and we're going to click on this add new constraints button at the bottom here. And we're just going to constrain it 0 from the top, 0 from the left, 0 from the right, and 0 from the bottom. Let's click add 4 constraints, and it's going to go to the safe area. You'll notice that it doesn't go to the edge of the screen. This is constrained into the safe area, which is what we want. And then we're going to click the plus, and we're going to add an image on top of this. And the image is then going to be in the center. But you'll notice that when I put the image here, if we look at the hierarchy on the left, the image is within that white view that we have. So when I constrain the image to the center of the white view, it's actually the center of the safe area, which is what we're looking for here. So I'm going to click on this align icon in the bottom right, and let's align it horizontally and vertically in the center of that view. And let's give it a default size with a width of 100 and a height of 100. Add 2 constraints. While I'm clicked on this image view, I'm going to change the image to our logo-transparent. And I'm also going to change the content mode to aspect fill. All right, lastly, I'm just going to take this white view that we have here. I'm going to click on this white view and just change the color to clear so we can't actually see it. All right, so our launch view is very simple. It's just going to be our logo in the center. So let's go into the navigator on the top left, this blue row here. And all we need to do is connect it into our app by selecting a launch screen file. And you should see the file that we just made, the launch screen. And let's build and run this to a simulator quick to see if our launch screen is coming through. All right, so right before the app actually opens, we should see that screen. So here's the launch screen, and then our app opens. And just to show you one more time, I'm going to close the app. We have our logo, we have the launch screen, and then the app opens. So our launch screen is definitely working. We can see it, and then the app opens, but you'll notice how fast that was happening. And most of the time, you want that to be as fast as possible because, like, you know, as little loading as possible is a better user experience generally. But this is such a fast load because our app is relatively small that it really doesn't even show. It shows for like less than 1 second. So after I made the SwiftUI to-do list app, I actually had a couple people request, how could I possibly make that launch screen longer? Like add a little bit of a loading view into that intro so that it doesn't just open the app immediately. And this could definitely add a better experience for an app like this where it loads so quickly that we can't even see the logo on the launch screen. And so now what we're going to do is actually just add a loading view that basically will look like the launch screen is hanging for a second, and then it will open up the app. This is kind of like a nice little hack that you guys could use in your apps as well. So what we're going to do is start by creating a new SwiftUI view. So on the views folder here, I'm going to right click and create a new file, SwiftUI view, and let's call this launch view. Click create. And I'm going to set this view to look exactly the same as the launch view that we just made. So what we're going to do is basically display this view. As soon as the launch view is done, we're going to display this view. And it's going to be essentially the exact same view, so the user won't know that the launch screen dismissed and this view started. So let's start by adding a Z stack, open the brackets, and we need a background color. So we're going to do color, let's do theme background. And as I said that, I realized that this is wrong because our launch screen, if we look at the assets, our launch screen uses the launch background color. So we have not put this as a variable in our actual code yet. So I'm going to go to the color here. It's in our color extension. This again is in our extensions folder. We're in the color file. We have our color theme. Let's create another struct. We'll call this launch theme, open brackets. We'll say let accent equals color name, and we called it launch accent color. Let me just double check. Launch accent color and launch background color. Let's do let background equals color launch background color. And let's just take this launch theme and put this in our extension as well. So we'll say static let launch equals launch theme. So now in our app we can call color.launch.accent or background. So in the launch screen, in the launch view, let's Command-Shift-K to clean and rebuild. Instead of color.theme, let's call color.launch.background. And it should be black. We can see it here. And let's call .ignores safe area. So we go to the edges of the screen. On top of this, I'm going to add an image, which will be the same image that we put into the launch screen with a name of logo-transparent dash. We have our logo here, and let's make it .resizable, and let's give it a frame of 100 by 100, just like we did on the launch screen. Before we actually build any animation onto this screen, let's see if we can get this screen to just pop up right after our launch screen in our app. So we need this launch view to show up. So I'm going to go into the first view in our app, so our app.swift file up here. And when our app loads, we load up this navigation view, which obviously has the home view. What I'm going to do is actually create a Z stack, open the brackets. I'm going to put the navigation view in the back of the Z stack, and in the front, we're going to add a launch view. All right, so this launch view right now should just appear on top of the navigation view, and hopefully it looks just like our launch screen. So let's run the app quickly. And we're going to load the launch screen, and then it should go right into our launch view, which it looks like it did. It has a slight offset, barely an offset. And we can see that it looks like our launch view is hanging. And that's because as soon as we entered the app, we're actually showing a screen that is actually the same as the launch screen. So let me do that one more time. We open the app, we go to the launch screen, and then it goes right into the launch view, which as a user, you can barely even tell that it changed. So now that we're in this launch view, we can manually add a little bit of animation, and then we can dismiss this view whenever we want. So if we want this loading view to stay for 1 second or 5 seconds or 10 seconds, we can do that ourselves now. So I'm going to jump back into the launch view and click resume. So on this view, so obviously we have this view just pop up and it's just a blank view. I want to add a little bit of animation, so let's get some practice with some animation on this. And let's first start by adding some text underneath this, and we'll have it animate onto the screen. So at the top here, let's create an @state private var. I'll call this loading text of type string. I'm going to set it equal to loading your portfolio ... And I'm going to add on top of the image, so we're in a Z stack here, so we have the background, we have the image layer, and then let's add one more. Let's add a text. Well, actually, let's add a Z stack here so we can put some items in it. And let's add a text with, of course, the loading text. Click resume. All right, so on this text, let's add maybe a font of headline. Let's add a foreground color of color.theme.accent. Or actually, I'm sorry, we should actually be using the launch colors on this view. So we're going to use the color.launch.accent, which should be our pink. Let's give it a font weight of maybe heavy, so it's a little thicker. And I'm going to just add an offset onto the Z stack. So let's add an offset with a Y of maybe 70. So it's below the image. And the reason I'm doing this Z stack and not putting the image in a V stack with the Z stack is because I want to make sure this image is right in the center of the screen, because I want it to be in the exact location as it is in our launch screen storyboard, right? Because when we transition from this launch screen storyboard to the launch view, I want the user to not know that we're actually transitioning. So I'm putting this image directly in the center, and then the text we're just going to put on top, but we're going to offset it so it looks like it's below the image. All right, now I want to animate this text onto the screen. So let's add a @state private var show loading text of type bool. Set it equal to false. And then in here, we're just going to say if show loading text, and then we'll put the text if it's true. All right, so I want to animate this onto the screen. So because we're just going to draw it on when we show the loading text, we can use transition. So we'll call .transition, and let's use any transition .scale .animation .ease in. So it eases in. And then on the entire Z stack, let's add a simple on appear. And then here, let's just call show loading text .toggle. So if we click resume, it should then animate onto the screen when we appear. So I'm going to press play, and it's a very quick animation, but it zooms in it scales in from small to large. So let's do it one more time. And we saw it zoom in. We're going to take this a little bit to the next level, and we're going to animate each of these letters individually. So because we want to animate each of these letters individually, instead of adding it as one single string onto the text, we're going to turn this string up here into an array of strings, and so that each letter will be its own string. So this variable up here, we're going to turn it into an array of strings. And to do that, we're going to take this string and we're going to map it. So we're going to call .map. And I'm just going to open the brackets here. And we're going to just create a string, and we're going to use the money sign 0. So this shorthand here is mapping a single string into an array of strings. So the loading text is actually going to be an array of strings that has L, and then O, and then A, and then D. And because it's an array of strings now, we need to use a for each loop to put it onto the screen. So commenting this out for a second, let's create an H stack, open the brackets, then we'll call a for each, open the parentheses. I'm going to loop on the loading text, which is an array now, dot indices. And then we'll press enter on the content, and this will be for each index. And in here, we're just going to put text with the loading text, and we're going to access the character at that index. So if I click resume, we should now see the text still on the screen. It's black. So let's take these 3 modifiers, I'm going to cut them and put them on the text here. All right, so we have loading your portfolio in each of these letters now. If I click on this text, if I stop the simulator and I click on this text, we can see the blue lines here. So each of these are their own item in the array, right? So each of these are being added inside this H stack. Obviously they're a little too spaced out, so let's make the H stack spacing of 0. That looks a little more normal. And I'm going to take the transition that we had, and I'm just going to put the transition on the entire H stack. So let's get rid of the loading text. So when I press play, it should now still load onto the screen. Cool. So we have that slight little scale animation at the very beginning. And now I want to animate each of these letters individually. So each index I want to animate separately. And we're going to do that with a timer, which I also covered in the last playlist, the SwiftUI Continued Learning. So at the top here, let's say let timer equals timer.publish. And we're going to publish every on in. And we're going to publish every 0.1 seconds on the main loop in dot, and we will use the common here. We want this publisher to start as soon as the screen loads, so we'll call .auto connect. All right, and then every time we get a published variable here, we want to do something on the screen. So on the view, let's call .onReceive, and here we can pass in a publisher, which will be our timer. And so every 0.1 seconds, the timer is going to execute, and this function will run. So let's create a variable at the top here at state var. Let's make it private var. Let's make the timer private as well. So here at state private var, we'll say counter of type int. We'll set it equal to 0 to start. And then every single time we receive a timer, we'll say with animation dot spring, open the brackets, and we'll say counter plus equals 1. So every time the timer goes off, every 0.1 seconds, we're going to add 1 to the counter. And then all we're going to do is basically check the counter versus the index. And if the counter is equal to the index, we're going to animate that letter. So here we'll say dot offset. We're going to use the Y only. And we'll say if counter is equal to the index of this letter, question mark, we'll offset it -5. So it'll move up 5 points, otherwise 0. So if I resume the canvas now, we should get a little bit of an animation happening. All right, we see it. So if I stop it, start it again, it happens pretty quick. Check each letter out. It's going to load each letter quickly. So as the timer goes up from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going through the indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's animating them upward. All right, so that works great, but obviously when we get to the end of the line, it does not restart. So let's just add a little bit of logic. So in our counter here, we're going to say, we first want to check if the counter is equal to the last item in this array. So if it's equal to the count of this array, so we'll say let last index equals the loading text dot count. So it's going to give us the count of all the items in this array. but we want the index, and the index, we know indexes start at 0, counts start at 1, so we need to subtract 1 from the count. So we'll do last index is actually the count minus 1. And then we'll say if the counter is equal to the last index. So if we're at the last item, let's then set the counter back equal to 0. And we'll say else. So if it's not the last item, we'll do the counter plus 1. Alright, so I'm going to stop it. I'm going to play it one more time. So now it should loop a little bit, and we should get some pretty cool animation here. You guys can see that. It looks like we got this really pretty high quality animation, honestly, for just a couple lines of code. And now all we need to do is, after maybe 1 or 2 loops, we can dismiss the entire screen and actually go into our app. So let's track how many loops we actually do. So how many times we actually finish this entire wave here. So at the top we'll say at state private var loops of type int. We'll set it equal to 0. And when we get to the end of each loop, so inside this bracket here, every time we set the counter back equal to 0, let's also add 1 to loops plus equals 1. So our loops are going up, so we'll have when we get to the end, it'll go to 1, and then when we get to the end again, it'll go to 2. And then finally, I want a variable to basically just dismiss the entire screen. So at the top here, we're going to add an at state var. We'll just say show launch view of type bool. We'll set it equal to true to start, just for a second. And we're going to then toggle this to dismiss the view. So coming back down, when we have our loops, we're adding to our loops, and then we're just going to check. We're going to say if loops is greater than or equal to 2. So if we get to 2 loops, let's say show launch view equals false. All right. So on the second loop, we're going to set launch view equals to false. And if we scroll back up, right now, this set launch view is not doing anything, of course, right? Like it's equal to true because that's what we just what we set, but it's not actually doing anything. So what we're going to do is actually bind this to the rest of our app. So I'm going to make this at binding instead, and it will be binding var launch view of type bool. And we're just going to bind it to the rest of our app. So let's fix the preview first, and we'll say down here we'll just use a .constant of true. And then if I try to run it, it's going to give me an error where we have this in our app. So let's jump to that error, and it's where we initialized it here. So I'm going to put the show launch view, and let's bind it into here. So at the top, let's create an at state var, private var, show launch view of type bool, and we're going to set it equal to true to start. Because when our app loads, we want to show the launch view, of course. So here we're going to say money sign show launch view. And then finally, we only want to put this launch view on the screen if, obviously, we are showing the launch view. So we're going to say if show launch view, open brackets, and then we'll put the launch view on the screen. And I want to animate it when it comes off of the screen. So we'll add a .transition, and we'll use .move.leading. So it animates to the left edge of the screen. And finally, when we are transitioning off of the screen, if we're in a Z stack, sometimes it will, sometimes the Z index will mess up a little bit. I kind of went over this in the SwiftUI bootcamp. So a quick fix, which I went ahead and checked for, is to just add this into a Z stack, and we'll put our show launch view in the center. And then on the Z stack, we'll just make sure the Z index is 2.0. So this Z stack is always on top of the navigation view, just so that while we're transitioning off of the screen, we still see the transition. It doesn't go and hide behind the navigation view. All right, so when we run our app, show launch view should be true. We should be looking at the launch view, and then our launch view is going to do that animation. And after 2 loops, it should toggle the show launch view to false. So this will then be false, and this if check will fail. So we will transition it off of the view hierarchy. And then of course, when the launch view is not showing, we'll see the actual rest of our application. So let's build and run this and see if it worked. Alright, so when I click this, it's going to first go into this launch screen storyboard. And this is just a plain view here with the symbol. And then immediately after this plain view, it's going to go to the launch view, which will look the same at the beginning. But it's then going to, on appear, it's going to show the loading text. And then the timer is going to go off and it's going to start this animation. So let's see if it works correctly. I'm going to click the button. We have our launch view, the text loaded in, and then we're going through our animation, and then it should go right into our app. And I think that looked pretty cool. And one of the cool features of this is that now that we are taking like 1 second, 2 seconds to load the app, the API calls for loading all of this information are actually happening at the same time. So while the app is actually in this loading view and the user thinks their portfolio is loading, we are actually loading all the data from the internet. So every time we get here, it's already preloaded, and that's a really great user experience. Alright guys, we are very close to being done with this app. In the next video, we're going to do a couple optimizations just to make our code a little bit better. We're going to check it out in light and dark mode. We're going to check it out on the iPad, and we might add a couple small features here and there, but the bulk of our app is definitely done. And I hope you guys are enjoying this, because this really is a fully functioning app at this point. I am super excited about it. I hope you guys are too. Alright, thank you guys for watching. As always, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.